Hello, I'm the Angry Spork, taking issue with the final installment of the Centurions miniseries from DC Comics. And if it's anything like the first three, then it'll probably involve Doc Terror trying to infiltrate one of their secret bases, which is actually a common thread I didn't realize until writing this episode. But hey, maybe the evil cyborg will surprise us and only sneak into each of their apartments dressed as the pizza guy. The cover, accentuating the all-out action of its last issue, features the team doing battle with large insects. This is why you always check your nuclear power plants and genetic testing facilities for hornets' nests, people. We begin in New York City, where the headquarters of the World Council is under attack by Terror's doomed drone strafers, apparently emerging from the river. That means Max Ray is going underwater to investigate. Suits us fine, Max. It leaves the real fighting for Ace and me. Well, up yours too, Jake. Try not to kill any civilians because you were too eager to blow up some robots like you were in the first issue, you sociopath. Oh, but Ace isn't much better. After stating this isn't as fun for him as his teammate, he prepares to go the quick route and launch a particle beam missile. But Crystal puts the kibosh on that, saying that the resultant explosion would destroy buildings within a 12-block radius, buildings which are mostly 200 stories tall. She also adds that when picking his current gear, the orbital interceptor, she expected Ace to be in the upper atmosphere to stop the drones, as they usually launch from Terror's Arctic base, not beneath the water. Wow, one X-factor in the well-oiled machine of mankind's only apparent defense begins imploding in the blame game. How has Terror not already won? Max, meanwhile, has found where their strafers are launching from, a hole in the riverbed. Jake is becoming overwhelmed with all the drones, so Crystal swaps McCloud's suit for the Skybolt set, for more focused attacks. After Max uses a torpedo to close the channel used by the drones, and for some reason he looks an awful lot like Stalin, yeesh. There's one more left that's particularly tricky for Jake, but he's sure he can handle it. And that's when Ace destroys it. After they land, Rockwell accuses the pilot of showing off and taking his target, because it's not like he was asking for help earlier or anything. Max tells them to cool it, and that the important thing is they ended another threat and saved lives. Then it's mentioned that there's a lot of dust left over from the strafers, but it looks like their heads have been transplanted onto ink blots. I see two morons and a guy desperate to emulate Donald Sutherland's mustache. They beam onto Skyvault, and McCloud wastes no time hitting on Crystal, asking for a kiss. Instead of brushing him off or tagging in Lucy the orangutan again, she reciprocates, giving him a peck on the cheek. Well, now he's going to expect a kiss every time he asks. He's just going to walk all over you without the proper discipline. You can go classic, or my personal preference. There's no time to rest, as Ace has to head out to stop some meteors heading for Earth. His orbital interceptor is much more suited for this job. No buildings around for my particle beam missile to damage. Yes, today we learned that was a bad thing, didn't we, Ace? Max worries that using the weapon will cause an explosion that disrupts satellite comms, but Dr. Kane bluntly says she doesn't think it will, and since it's her field, the water guy should stop second-guessing her. The missile is launched, resulting in a huge explosion, and I guess ending the threat, because we go to Max and Jake being sent to Yellowstone National Park. Apparently, Old Faithful is building up too much pressure, so it's their job to create a second hole to ease it some, and somehow make it an even more impressive attraction. Max will head into the geyser, while Jake choppers in the air. They'll fire at the same time from different directions just as the geyser erupts, so it'll carry Ray and the loosened rocks to the surface. And if you don't make it, they'll dedicate a stall to each of you in the men's restroom. When given the order, they fire, and as improbable as it sounds, it works, creating a new Faithful next to the old one, just in time for an army of tourists to arrive. Were they somehow promised ahead of time of a new geyser by way of a dangerous stunt through the means of essentially government agents? Or are they all gathering to gawk at the marine scientist that looks like Stalin again? What the expletive? Meanwhile, it's revealed that Skyvault was a duplication, as Crystal removes her face and wig, revealing Doc Terror's daughter, Amber. And I made the perfect Crystal Kane, if I do say so myself. Well, Hacker auditioned for the part, but didn't respond to his callback by the deadline. Something about a yoga retreat or something. The dust the Centurions noticed was actually something that seeped into the exoframes and allowed Terror to intercept them with their own transporter. With their missions complete, Doc figures it's time to bring them home. And when they're asleep, we give them the works. Shaving cream in their hands, tickling their noses, laxative in their bedtime snack cookies. And then we toilet paper the real Sky Vault. Our heroes arrive at the authentic base, greeted by security officers with guns, seeming a little too pleased to inform them that they're under arrest for crimes against humanity. Jake gets real aggressive at the accusation, saying he'd make the guy eat his gun. Makes sense, since he's a decorated soldier and all. And when Crystal arrives, she confirms this is no gag. How could you do what you've done? Wow. Even in this era of peace, offensive tweets get taken real seriously. The meteors Ace destroyed were actually being attracted to Earth by researchers studying them for years, and meteorite fragments are falling across the planet. One even smashing a hole through the seawall around Seattle, which, if you remember in issue 2, is not only Max's hometown, but is basically a tiny island off the coast of the United States now, and is currently being flooded.
He's history's greatest monster!
And the stunt with Old Faithful has vented the hot spring, so the natural phenomena will eventually stop erupting altogether. To top it all off, their collective whoopsies have disrupted land and satellite communications.
And that's gonna bring you great shame, I tell you what.
The Centurions say they only did as Crystal instructed, but she hadn't heard from them since they took out the strafers earlier. She intends to send them to the New York HQ until everything's been investigated. Sweetheart, how can you do this to us? To me! Have you forgotten about all that sexual harassment, unwanted pet names, demands for affection, and never taking a hint that you weren't interested? Did all that mean nothing to you? They're beamed down, held under guard, and ordered to remove their exoframes. Then a priority message comes in from Sky Vault. Crystal wants them back, because there's a crisis only they're able to handle. They return to the fake Sky Vault, with Dr. Kane being much friendlier, though Jake is getting irate from the changing tones. Doc Terror has allegedly unleashed giant cyborg hornets targeting a crowded Long Island beach, so that's where the team is transported next. Max is puzzled that he's in his Hornet suit again, and Ace tells him that Crystal knows the best gear for the job. Yes, compliment her tactical skills, and maybe you'll be the one saved from the court-martial. Is that what you're thinking there, McLeod? They see the bugs arrive, though they seem to be very far away and headed in a different direction given this panel, and the beachgoers get terrified and run away. But Max notes that it seems they were actually afraid of the Centurions, not the bugs. Even if our last missions weren't 100% successful, we've never done anything to harm people. Technically, those missions were successful. You did what you were told. It's just that they were very detrimental. And here he's supposed to be the observant one. Max creates a whirlpool to try bringing some of the Hornets down, and it looks to create a conal splash upwards, which feels like the opposite of what he was planning, but again, I'm not a future scientist. Crystal commends his idea, adding that people in the boats nearby have already evacuated to safety, something you'd think the level-headed leader would have checked on before doing this. Ace is having trouble hitting the mechanobugs, with some of his missed shots hitting the beach, which still has civilians present, as Jake uses his chopper to kick up some sand in hopes of damaging the internal machinery of their targets. But, as Doc Terror points out while watching the chaos, and the reader might have surmised, the Hornets aren't real, merely holographic projections from the battlesuits they're using, leading them to attack false images only they can see. This assures the Centurions will forever be discredited, and the real Dr. Kane will be helpless to stop Terror, much like the rest of the world. Even with the deception at play, they didn't bother telling people to evacuate the beach, didn't confirm boats were emptied, and didn't seem to wait to fire when innocents would have been in danger. And this is them thinking it's just another job. All three have become a few sockets shy of an exoframe. Dr. Kane, what are the Centurions doing? They're creating a massive panic and destroying the beach for no reason. They need a specific permit for that, and I happen to know it takes at least 2 weeks to get it. Don't ask me how I know that. Watching the scene from Sky Vault, the World Council Secretary, dressed like Magneto on Laundry Day, wants some new Centurions sent out to stop the current team. but Crystal says they aren't ready for battle and that could cause more damage, and Max and the others can't be beamed back because of signal jamming. With no other available option, she dons a blue exosuit and has one of her technicians beam her down in the Sky Knight armor. When her confused compatriots see her, Amber, posing as Dr. Kane, says it's an imposter working for Terror, a message even Crystal receives. Both Ace and Jake fly to intercept, as Amber Chris says the fake is out to discredit the team and must be destroyed at all costs.
Getting ahead of the truth by telling a lie that's more comforting than admitting you were duped. Feels awfully relevant these days. I can't imagine why.
McLeod can't hear Crystal or see her face clearly, so she takes a chance and removes her helmet. Ace sees her seconds too late, firing one of his guns and hitting her just as he makes the realization of who the imposter is. He narrowly catches her as Amber reports Terror let loose a herd of elephants to stampede in Africa. You mean real elephants and not cyborg that are actually robot elephants? The red-headed doctor is briefly dazed and Ace asks for a kiss, because of course he does, and that's when she slaps him. It's confirmation enough that this is the genuine article. The two land just as Amber tells them to prepare for immediate beam-up, and the Terrors must have a different definition of that word because the team has time to discard their bulky equipment and take off their exoframes before it all transports away. It's reasoned that Amber's infiltration of Skyvault back in issue 2 allowed her and her father to duplicate the base for their own purposes, and now they have some of the Centurions' gear. But Max thinks it's a short-lived victory. We go to outer space outside the counterfeit Skyvault, where Hacker finds something weird about the exosuits. They've somehow been booby-trapped, and so he, Amber, and Doc Terror get into an escape ship and fly out before the big kaboom of the exact replica of a space station that took more than 6 years to build.
And they state that the young lady Terror's visit was only in the previous month. There's no way they could have a functioning space station up in orbit that fast with no one noticing. It would have made more sense to construct a fake control room in their Arctic base and keep the team so busy they can't visit the rec room or the cafeteria or anything. Even by cartoon standards, this is straining willing disbelief.
We get this awkward panel in the center of the final page where Terror vows to strike again, which didn't feel necessary, but whatever. The ship and the duplicate satellite's destruction have been detected by Skyvault proper, and the guys feel like Terror managed to get out in time. Crystal says they'll need to return to base and sort this whole ordeal out, but the guys point out that they can't beam up because they don't have exoframes. So the comic ends with our heroes relaxing on the beach, specifically on the towels of those people they unwittingly scared away. He's right, darling. Why don't you go back and calm things down? Besides, we could use a little R&R before we have to clean up all the things we were duped into doing wrong.
I have a laser cannon on my torso. Get moving! That was the final issue of the Centurions miniseries, and the Centurions comics in general, as far as I can tell.
This ending had kind of a shenanigans vibe to it. The team realizes that they were tricked into causing damage by their worst enemy, revealing a huge vulnerability in their network, and they laugh it off with the resident wannabe ladies' man telling the woman he's constantly hitting on, that's always rejecting him, that he shot, to clean things up for them while they relax and pose for a beefcake calendar. Open fire, Crystal, no one would blame you. Weird thing is, I suspected something was weird early on when Jake got mad at Ace for taking out that last strafer in the opening battle, but that was apparently them being normal. Confirmation, of course, came when the disguised Amber acquiesced to McLeod's kiss request, which may be her operating on the false impression she got of his relationship with Dr. Kane back in issue 2, which is kind of a clever misstep when you think about it, though it would also mean the villains didn't do much research into Crystal, which feels like a huge oversight on their part. Even weirder is super observant Max, who figures things out with such convenience, didn't suspect a thing between the weird missions, real Crystal condemning them, and fake Crystal being uncharacteristically snippy with him.
Like previous issues, this one had a really good concept, but it spent so much time showing it in action, the resolution just got sped along, and the after effects barely given any thought. If there had been a 5th issue or a follow-up ongoing, I wouldn't be surprised if their insane behavior just wasn't addressed at all.
I liked that they had Crystal suiting up, even though we don't know if she's done any training with the gear. Though she is the head of Skyvault and makes the call which armor the guys get for each situation, it kinda makes sense she'd have enough familiarity to use some of it. Not sure if she ever did this in the cartoon, but it wouldn't shock me. I kind of expected there to be some tongue-in-cheek remark from Ace how she apparently used one of his suits, his flight gear, and how maybe that means she's into him, but surprisingly, they didn't do that.
Though I'm sure if this had been done in the mid-90s, there'd be some artists that would have made her exoframe expose a little more skin. A lot more skin. You know, to be aerodynamic.
While each issue is a self-contained story, there are some connective tissues and recurring elements. Ace being full of himself and unable to accept when a woman isn't interested, that's an obvious one. Max, for example, notices things that lead him to make accurate deductions of a given situation. He seems more on the ball, like picking up on lip reading when they go deaf, having his suspicions about the documentary reporter, among other things. He's much more no-nonsense than his two comrades, which kind of make him a typical multi-talented leader who has that perceptive edge because he's the de facto leader, less flawed than the others. Then there's Jake, who's often shown enjoying combat, and often mentions, at least once per issue, how he'd like to personally take out Doc Terror.
Even though his animated counterpart was designed by Norio Shioyama, like all the other characters, I'm curious if the comic artists intentionally made him look like what Ben Grimm might look like as a human. After all, just like Jake Rockwell, the Thing just loves to fight.
Speaking of resemblances, seriously, why did Max keep resembling Joseph freaking Stalin? Maybe it's the jet black brushed back hair and the curl of his mustache, but how did no one see this? This can't have been on purpose, and it's extra weird considering that this happens after they actually stop accidentally making Ace McCloud look so creepy. But again, overall the art is fine, about what you'd get from this era in comics, though there are some minor inconsistencies, like more or less facial detail depending on what page you're on, or what panel.
Overall, this series could have done more with their concepts, but it was meant to sell toys and the characters were archetypes instead of complex personalities. While flawed, it was kind of fun, even if some of the content hasn't aged well. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got... Jeez! Get her away! Get her away!